make sure I give credit where credit is due. This is from Better Humans. I found this in 2016. This comes to us from Buster Benson and John Magnugian III. All of these things here on the outside, there's about 170 of these things. Those are all cognitive biases that science has found. It's not just one or two things that we have trouble with. It's a lot of different things. I'm not going to go through all 170 of them tonight. That's the extended version. Haven't made that one up yet. But what they've done is they've taken those, they've grouped them in certain different groups and categories, and then they have them in 4 major categories. I'll talk about the 4 major categories and some of the subcategories. Because if not, I think it would be a little too much for anyone, myself included. What is a cognitive bias? It's a systematic pattern of deviation from the norm or rationality and judgment. We are not rational. That's Dan Ariely has a book called Predictably Irrational. Not only are we irrational in an economic sense, but we're predictably irrational. These are these biases that we have. The whole branch of behavioral economics is from this. Because what happened is classic economics assumed that human beings were rational. It based all other formulas and things, the fact that humans were rational. Human beings are not rational. We're not only irrational, we're predictably irrational. What happens is we draw conclusions in a illogical fashion. We create our own subjective social reality from our perception. Like the second quote from Umberto. We are creating a reality. So I want you to understand this. As we sit here today, I'm trying to get a count. I went to public school, so it might take me a while. We got close to 20. Let's say we have 20 people in here. Good enough for government work. We have 21 realities here. This is what I think. This is as close as I get, by the way, to faith. We all construct our own realities in our own minds. I believe there is an objective reality that exists. And the objective reality is this rational reality that we should live in, but we don't all live in that rational reality. What happens is, we're not able to process all the information that comes into our brains. You are bombarded with stimuli all the time, and you can't process it all. It would be impossible, so we create shortcuts. We'll talk about those shortcuts. We call them heuristics. And the interesting thing is most of the time these heuristics, these shortcuts are good enough. There's a word that you might run into if you study this called satisficing. It's sufficient and it's satisfactory. It's not optimal. When I'm working with teams and I'm working with organizations, what I'm really seeking is this concept of optimization. When teams come to me and organizations come to me and say, yeah, we're getting along, we're doing fine. In fact, I always say, you know what, it's great. You guys made some money and you're still in business because you hired me, and kudos to you. The question is not whether you're successful, the question is, can you be more successful? Can you be optimal? These cognitive biases and things that we are good, but not optimal. And that's what I'm looking for. In other words, what I'm looking for is trying to get as close to objective reality as we can. And these are the things that hold us back. Confirmation bias is one of the big ones. Sometimes we have too much information. And I got a couple quotes. We tend to accept information that confirms our prior beliefs and ignore or discredit information that does not. Not only do we have confirmation bias, but we've actually created whole news organizations built around it. Have we not?
At least one.
But it's on both sides. And that is because, again, if we're pattern seeking or we're seeking for confirmation, that's the dopamine. We watch these shows and we either get jacked up and all kind of mad because that's just the way they are. It's what I always said it was. And that's confirmation bias. So we get mad at each other. And that getting mad makes us feel good in a way because it's a dopamine, and that's a strange thing, that we get mad at each other and feel good about it. That's confirmation bias. We're right, you're wrong. We notice things that are already primed in memory or repeated often. This is the thing, you buy a car, you're going to see that car. If you buy a Prius, all you're going to see is Prius. Bizarre, funny, visually striking, anthropomorphic things stick out more than non-bizarre, unfunny things. This is why I try to tell jokes in class. This is why I try to make things funny, because we tend to remember things that are funny. We remember things that are bizarre. We don't notice things when they're not bizarre or funny and they're just the same. We notice when something has changed. So this is another thing. We don't always look at absolutes, but we look at relative things. And we notice when things have changed. The class about the bizarre one that I have, which is I always notice when I go somewhere that I haven't been for a while, when trees have been cut down or missing. I don't know why. I notice when things change. We're drawn to details that confirm our existing belief. That's confirmation bias. We notice flaws in others more easily than flaws in ourselves. And this is really interesting. It's called the attribution error. I'm going to pick on the people who's late. I'm not picking on you. I'm just saying, when we're late to the meetup, it's because there's traffic, it's because, I don't know, the dog threw up, there's all kinds of excuses and reasons. When I show up late to the meetup, I'm lazy, shiftless, no good. Attribution error. And we all do that. It's all very human. Yeah, yeah.
Anybody driving faster than you is a maniac, and anybody driving slower than you is an idiot.
Idiot, yeah.
The old George Carlin one.
Yeah, the old George Carlin, yeah, absolutely.
And then 80% of people are above average, or consider themselves above average.
Yeah, the majority of people consider, it's a huge number, consider themselves good drivers. There's another one called the Lake Wobegon. I think it's the Lake Wobegon effect.
Yeah.
Right? Lake Wobegon from NPR. I wanted to bring in another quote on this confirmation bias from Max Planck, famous physicist, right?
Yep.
Did I get it right?
Yep.
Smartest people around, scientists. You imagine if the scientists get it wrong, how tough it is going to be for the rest of us. But what he says is the scientific truth does not triumph by convincing its opponents and making them see the light, but rather because its opponents eventually die and a new generation grows up that is familiar with it. This is science people. These are the people who gave us, right, the null hypothesis. These are the people who are supposed to look at things scientifically. We have a very, very difficult time of not confirming our own biases. The phrase that comes from this, just so I get it right, which is not exactly what Max Planck said, which is why I showed you this quote, but the quote that's often attributed to him is that science advances one funeral at a time. And these are the science, so that this is a problem. Next major category, we have not enough meaning. We have all these things bombarding us that we're trying to find patterns and meaning in, but we don't always have them. One of these is classified in this group as survivorship bias, which is concentrating on people, things who made it past some selection process and overlooking those that did not. So what's a good example of survivorship bias? Well, it's all these biographies of famous people.
Startups.
Startups.
Startup founders.
Right.
Successful ones.
Right, the successful ones. We only hear the stories about the successful ones. For every Steve Jobs and Bill Gates who drops out of college, there's hundreds who drop out of college and they don't do so well. History is written by the victors. I used to have a cartoon that I put up near my desk that said, don't listen to people who tell you not to play the lottery. I won the lottery. Survivor bias. We find stories and patterns even in sparse data. We find Virgin Mary in a piece of toast. We find faces in a lot of things because we are born to recognize faces. We have a whole bunch of neurons in our brains that recognize facial patterns. I saw a show, I think it was on Brain Games, where this woman could recognize like 10,000 faces. She never forgot a face. We fill in characteristics from stereotypes, generalities, prior histories. We all know. We're all susceptible to stereotypes. We all have stereotypes that we use. It's just we don't have enough information. The people that we're familiar with, we're fond of. This is the whole concept of tribalism. This is another problem that we have in today's society and today's politics, is we have this tribalism that causes us a lot of problems because it's us versus them. That's not something that's new. This is something that's actually hardwired into our brains. This is something that we have to work against. And when people tell me I don't see color or I'm not prejudiced, I'm like, okay, you probably are. Maybe you're that very special one in a million, but I don't think you are. This is the one that's really funny, is we think we know what others are thinking. I'm on the BART a lot. I'm on the train, public transit, and you look at somebody, oh yeah, this guy didn't pay attention in high school. He was just having fun. He was goofing off, whatever. You can make up a whole story about people. You don't know anything about these people, right? And we project our current mindset and assumptions on the past and the future. We expect that everything is pretty much going to be the same as it is today and the same as it was yesterday. This is a big problem. A lot of these cognitive illusions and biases are going to cause us a lot of problems, and they are causing a lot of problems. One of the biggest problems is global warming. We always expect things will be the same way. The other problem with global warming is it's very, very slow, and we notice changes and we don't notice slight changes. There's all kinds of other problems with global warming as well, because of free rider effect, etc. We need to act fast. There's time pressure on us, so we make shortcuts sometimes when we have time box pressure. The folks who put this together, they classified this lovely Dunning-Kruger effect. It's one of my favorite cognitive biases. Dunning-Kruger effect is where people with low ability have illusionary superiority and mistakenly assess their ability as greater than it is. My mother used to say, a little knowledge is a dangerous thing. That's kind of what this is saying. The people who have the least amount of knowledge have the most confidence in the knowledge they have. If you talk to an expert's going to say,
I have doubts.
expert, yeah. Well, here again, remember I was telling you how to be successful as a consultant. One is have books. They don't have to be good. You just got to have them. Second, you got to have quadrants. Everybody got a quadrant. And the third thing is you always say, what do you say, Dale? If I come to you with a problem, what do you say? It depends. It depends.
Tell me more.
Yeah, it depends. You talk to an expert's going to say it depends. It's going to be contextual. Because what happens is, as you're going from this Dunning curve where you have a low ability and a high confidence in your ability, as you learn more about something, what you realize is what you didn't know. You don't realize how big the domain is until you actually spend some time studying it, and you're like, oh my gosh, I really don't know. This is a big problem, actually. I spend my life in software development. This is a big problem with software developers, young software developers. They think they're rock star developers. They just don't know what they don't know. They may be good, but they don't know what they don't know. We need to be confident in our ability to make an impact and feel like what we do is important. This is really interesting, because if you think about this concept of 21 realities in here in this room, another way to put it is, we're the star of our own movie, and the rest of the people are just bit players. What we do is incredibly important and significant. That's one thing I tell my kids, by the way. I've got 3 boys, and I always tell them, I said, look, don't worry about that zit on your face, because all your friends have got one on their face, and that's all they're worried about. They're not worried about you. Nobody's got the time to think about you. We're all too busy thinking about ourselves. We favor immediate, relatable things in front of us over the delayed and distant. This is one of the problems that we have with things that take a long time, like solving real problems. We're motivated to complete things where I've already invested time and energy in. This is the big one. You folks, I know a lot of folks are in project management, program management in this room. This is a big one. It's called the sunk cost fallacy, so you should be familiar with it. The fact is that when you're looking at whether or not you should continue to do something, you have to look at what happens from today forward. And do I expect when I'm going to invest going forward, will I get a bigger return? I don't look at what I've already spent. It's gone. And that's really, really difficult for human beings to do. This gambler's fallacy, when I was younger, I used to gamble, and it was always that thing, just let me get back to even. No, stop. If you're not going to win, stop. We're motivated to preserve our autonomy and status in a group and to avoid irreversible decisions. We favor options that are simple or that have more complete information over more complex, ambiguous options. Again, now you know the reasons why it's so difficult to solve some of the problems that we have. I told you how to be successful as a consultant. Let me tell you how to be successful as a politician. Do not go beyond 3 words. I've watched all the Democratic debates. They have yet to find somebody who can say things in simple 3 words. Lock her up, build the wall. That's what you need. Because that's what people are drawn to. They are drawn to people who are certain. They are drawn to people with simple ideas. It is just what we are as human beings. And that's not always the best thing, to vote for the person with the 3-word slogan. And the 4th major category is, what are the things that we should remember, and what about memory, and how good is our memory? We tend to think our memories are really good. In fact, if I'm going into a court, what is the best evidence in court, other than DNA evidence? Eyewitness testimony. What does eyewitness testimony rely on? Somebody's memory. But we're highly suggestible in memory. Much more than we think we are, and scientists now are playing around with this, and it's really, really, really frightening when you know what happens. It's the concept of suggestibility. We fill in gaps in memory. We create memories from whole cloth, from things that have never happened before.
Central Park 5.
Central Park 5. There's this whole thing about Satanism. Maybe some of you folks are too young. They were arresting people because they were supposedly satanic cults, or they were going to drain the blood out of kids or something. It happened back in the 70s. What happened was some people ended up in jail. They never did it. These memories were planted into these children. It was this hyper bizarre period in American history. It never was true. And actually, maybe it's a little bit off topic, but why this happened is because at the time, daycare centers were new. Women were entering the workforce and they were putting their kids in daycare center, and a lot of people were a little bit nervous about it. And all these satanic things were about daycare centers, and these wonderful people who were taking care of other people's kids were put in jail for it. We added and reinforced some memories after the fact. I mentioned before there's a show called Brain Games. If you get a chance, I believe it's on Netflix. It talks about these things. With one word, I can change your memory. And they did on the show. They staged an accident in front of a bunch of people, and then they had a policeman come up. He was an actor. Policeman comes up and asks a simple question. How fast was a car going when it crashed into the other car? And then he asked another group of people, how fast was a car going when it bumped into the other car? And changing that one word changed their memory of the incident. It's that susceptible. We discard specifics to form generalities. We reduce events and lists to key elements. We store memories differently based on how they were experienced. So those are some of the major things.